They wouldn't be able to, absolutely. Yeah.
There's a number one red flag test that anyone can apply.
Is. Really
I mean, now after 45 years of mediumship and 50 years of daily yoga practice, international best-selling author and expert medium Richard Lawrence reveals 5 critical factors that you can use to determine whether a medium is the real thing or not.
The danger is, though, malevolent forces can come to bear upon the consciousness of a would-be medium, and you can get not just inaccuracy, but deliberate mistruths by those who want to confuse and want to do damage. People who say, I think it's easy, aren't accurate. I know that sounds dogmatic, but they just are not accurate.
By the end of this video, you're going to have practical, grounded guidance that you can immediately apply to the countless mediums and channel messages out there, so that you can be a much better judge for yourself of whether they are real or not. Richard.
Darren.
Let me say that recently on TikTok, I've started to see more and more so-called mediums sharing messages they claim to have received. And to me, these claims seem to be getting more and more absurd by the day, which is what I wanted to do this show so badly. And in case anyone thinks that I'm overreacting on this, doesn't really matter. I just wanted to share this first quote from Dr. King, which I think really sets the scene for why we're even doing the show today.
Yeah.
So Dr. King says this. He says, according to the ancient mystic Upanishads, the greatest gift that one man can give to another is wisdom. As this is so, then the greatest crime that a man can commit is to give that which is not wise or cause confusion in the minds of people by giving them the wrong teachings. So if many of these mediums aren't the real thing, then obviously this is a problem. And then the question becomes, how can we help people to make better judgments about what they're seeing out there? Because they're seeing all of this, all of these different mediums and whatnot, which is where you come in. And that's why I'm excited to have this conversation today.
So am I.
So you've come up with a series of tests, let's call it that, which anyone can apply in order to determine if a channel message is the real thing or not.
Yeah.
And I think this is a very helpful guide. Now, people might say, well, on what basis are you weighing on the subject? So for anyone who's not familiar with the show or with you, I thought I'd just give them a brief overview here, which is that you've been doing yoga practices for over 50 years. You've been practicing mediumship for 45 years. And I think what will also be fascinating to our audience is that recently you compiled a list of contacts that you've had since you started practicing mediumship. And on that list were 37 people. And I know that there are a lot of people that you didn't even put on the list.
Yeah.
But I thought I would just read some of these out because it just out of interest for everybody, because it reads like a who's who of the last 2,000 years. It's like just to give them a sense of, some names that probably people will recognize. So we've got on here, so Winston Churchill, Rabindranath Tagore, we've got Madame Blavatsky, Annie Besant, Pope John the 23rd, that'll be a controversial one, Dante Alighieri, we've talked a couple times with him on the show about specific messages he'd given. We've got Sir Francis Bacon, might go into him a little bit today. And then some others, Tolstoy, Saint Mark, Paramahansa Yogananda, John of Patmos, who, stay tuned folks, because we have an incredible episode coming about him. And then Erasmus, Sri Aurobindo. I could go on. There's some incredible names on here. And I know we're also going to go into later on the show why they would have even communicated with you in the first place, because I think that's a very interesting point. And a good yardstick that people can use to evaluate any medium that they may be looking at.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then the other angle I'd like to go into, hope you're making a list of all we've got coming up here.
I'm going to take your list.
Is your own spiritual development over this period. Because I think, having an understanding of that spiritual development and also how the contacts that you've had have evolved over that period really gives some insight into how mediumship actually works. And, it's that insight also that I'd like to be able to offer people today. So we have all of that and probably more coming up on the show today.
Can I jump in?
I'm surprised you haven't yet.
No, what I just want to say is that I want to agree with what you said right at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're doing this show because, frankly, out of compassion, because we care about the people, as Dr. King itemized there, these people are being misled. But also, I must say, I do have a lot of feeling for some of the people who are making these mistakes, who are, I think they fully believe that they are channeling various high intelligences from the cosmos and from the ascended masters and so on, or even others, and who are not. Now, it isn't to say at all that there are no genuine mediums out there, because there are genuine mediums out there, and this is where discrimination is needed. But people who get lost, people who are encouraged on various workshops Or to name one thing that you and I came across, a very well-established promoter of disclosure in the UFO movement is encouraging people to think they've got contacts with beings from other planets without giving them any training, any guidance, much. I mean, we came across one person who thinks you're serving the world when you have an ice cream. You remember? And
I remember
this is no
that.
joke.
Oh
I
my
mean,
gosh,
this is what
I remember that. Yeah.
And your heart goes out to these people,
Yeah.
because the danger then is a mental health condition. And let me say this, well, a couple of things. First of all, I just want to say that Dr. George King is absolutely at the pinnacle, at the top of the tree of mediumship, in a completely different league, a completely different methodology, and a completely different caliber of communicator than people like me. So I have to say that straight away. And the other thing I'd say is I don't want people to feel that mediumship is something you need to do.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because for the developing spiritual person, yes, as we've said many times on this show, you will unlock your psychic powers in one way or another. That's part of your progress. If you haven't done it, then you haven't evolved sufficiently yet, because you can. And we teach people to do that on our various events. But you don't have to do it through mediumship. I've done it through mediumship. I think I would have had a particular role which hasn't really come to pass because of the incredible range of what Dr. King did. Has made quite a few other efforts superfluous to requirements, but it's still been there, and he encouraged me with it. So you mentioned 45 years. I mean, he basically set me up, I think it was in 1980, so I was in my 20s, as a psychic consultant, because he'd seen that I could do that. And he said to me, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. So when he actually, in those days, I used a crystal ball and very soon didn't need it. But he even devised the cover for me, and he set it up, and I was doing a lot of readings to what you might call, inverted commas, ordinary people. And I was doing it, I got very heavily booked up, maybe a year, 2 years ahead. And in that period, you'd have multiple contacts with people on other realms. I wasn't channeling per se at the beginning. I was giving readings.
Okay.
It evolved into mediumship. Two of the guides that were helping me with these readings, to give the readings, turned out to be disciples of a particular guru I could later receive messages from. That's another story we might come on to.
Yeah, okay.
But what I'd say there, when you're doing that and you're getting contacts with perhaps the deceased loved ones of people you're giving readings to, people who might be suffering from bereavement, for example, and things like that, you do get multiple contacts along the way. But at a very, I'm going to say, basic level, can be extremely basic level. Not a negative, not a bad level, but a very, very basic level. A basic level which might be not necessary, might be overdone by a lot of people, because you can hold back such guides if they feel they need to come back and constantly give guidance to someone who's still here, when they should be moving on.
I see.
You can also hold back people here who kind of want to keep up a contact with someone they're emotionally attached to.
I see.
Through mediumship, which isn't the purpose of it. So I kind of moved on, and I talked to Dr. King about this. I also made a couple of mistakes which he helped me with, encouraged me to keep going in those early years. And then from there, I started channeling. So that's my sort of backstory. But all the people you mentioned on that list, and some of the ones that are most interesting to me, are people I'd never heard of. And then I looked them up. One was John de Balliol. Another was Nigel de Longchamps, I think was his full name. And there are others like that, Magdalena de la Cruz. They were people who are in history. You can find them on it, but I didn't know of them. So this was also very interesting. And of course, you have contacts with people who aren't famous, because fame is not a measure of greatness, just a measure of renown.
That was a great point. And as you say, there's many more people than we've listed here, and whose names haven't been included. But I think it speaks to the sort of the vast experience that you can bring to the table here and offer in this conversation. Yeah. I just wanted to nail down a couple of things that you said just in the introduction that you were making there, which is that a lot of people they're not necessarily lying, as you say. They may just themselves not really understand what's going on in the mediumship that they're doing. And so, whether that's the result of a delusion or uncontrolled imagination or mental health issues or just simple even misidentification of the person who's communicating.
Yeah.
I mean, that can be a case, can't it?
It can, yeah.
And I think this is all, this all just comes back to the same thing that people on both sides experience, which is that there just isn't that much good information about how mediumship actually works.
Very, very true.
And what goes into
There
it.
really isn't.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who are mediums don't really know how it works.
Yeah.
And if they're good enough, at a certain level, they might not need to. Same with healing. You can have people give healing who don't really know how it works.
Yeah, but
they are giving healing at a certain level. But there'll
Yeah.
come a stage, if you want to refine it, and if you want to be really accurate, and if you want to raise your consciousness to a higher level of guide who isn't contacting you for personal reasons or to give help to an individual, but is contacting you for a broader reason to do with your work for humanity, your selfless work, not your job necessarily, but it might be, in my case, it is my job, but I'm fortunate, but it's your selfless humanitarian work that will draw them to you. And those guides you mentioned there, I mean, for example, there's one Saint Rock who was attracted by healing. We were running healing campaigns at the time, and this is what drew him to contact me. And because he was, it turns out, I think, the patron saint of healing the plague in, I think, the 14th century.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So there's a real connection.
The Vatican didn't recognize him when he did it, by the way.
Okay.
That's what they do. Hundreds of years later, yes, okay.
Okay, yeah.
And it helped them through a certain plague that was there later. But, however, he was interested in that. You mentioned Sir Winston Churchill. His interest in contacting me is I was doing a lot of broadcasts on UFOs. And he even actually corrected me because I was quite critical of the cover-up. I still am, because I think anyone who knows me and knows the etheric side, he knows that.
Yeah.
And of course, he was Prime Minister in a period when the cover-up was going on. He wanted to also tell me not only that he gave support. I mean, he gave tangible support. I mean, I remember doing a TV interview with the late Patrick Moore, if anyone's heard of Patrick Moore, who was a very articulate, brainy astronomer and hostile to UFOs, hostile to alien life, by the way. Didn't believe in alien life anywhere. So he's been proved wrong even by science since, but we're talking the early 80s. And he was going to do a TV interview, I think, on the BBC the next day with me. The night before I did the interview, he said, "I will be in the wings."
Okay.
And when I did the interview, in the wings of a little stage, there was a very well-known presenter at the time called Kenny Everett, who was also on the show. And in the wings, they had a photograph of Winston Churchill because they'd done a survey of the audience to decide who was the greatest person in history. And this audience had voted for Winston Churchill. So as I actually walked on the stage, the audience was shouting out the name of Winston Churchill because of this quiz they'd done, which is another item in the show. And then I went into UFOs. And I think, him being who he was, of course, it was helpful to me then in my 20s with a very articulate broadcaster to put the case for UFOs, which I did, actually to the point where Patrick Moore said he wouldn't go on with me again.
Really?
Afterwards, yeah. And actually, I told Dr. King, I said, well, I had one or two people cancelling in that period. And I remember I was going to do an interview with the chairman of the Skeptics Society. And in fact, they'd asked me to give a lecture to them. And they said, what would your topic be? I said, the flaws in skepticism. And they didn't book me.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So this particular person, the chairman or the secretary, whatever he was, had cancelled the interview. And I asked the TV company why. He said he didn't feel qualified.
What?
I told Dr. King, I said, look, I'm getting cancellations. Patrick won't go on. And he said, keep at it. Don't let that stop you at all. Keep pushing on. So anyway, Winston Churchill, though, did correct me on one point, which was that he said he wasn't to blame. and he had tried to find out about flying
for the cover-up.
For the cover-up. Well, he wasn't even party to it. He himself was deceived, and this has now emerged through the Public Records Act, that he did try to get information on flying saucers, and he was fobbed off by, I think, the Admiralty or whatever the department was in those days, with a lot of hogwash, really. So that was him. I'm just giving examples.
Yeah, no, these are good. This
Pope
is the reason
John the
why they contacted
23rd,
you.
which would surprise a lot of people. This will surprise people. His interest also was in UFOs.
Really?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have
He'd
guessed
had
that.
some
Yeah.
dealings with them. I don't know the ins and outs of it. There are reports, including in Etherocyte teaching, that popes were approached. He may have had some regrets, or he may have, again, been subject to some kind of cover-up. But he too was like supportive of that, and that support can be given not just through channeling, but through energy at certain times as well. If you make a contact,
I see. Well, I think what's great about what you've shared there, I think, is that we've kind of started to tackle the first, I think, test really that we can apply, which is when you look at a medium. I mean, what makes this contact credible in the first place?
Yeah.
Why would they be contacted? And you've given a couple of good examples there of, the reason that they were contacting you is because the work that you were involved in at the time.
Yeah.
And also the support they could give you as a part of that work.
Yeah.
Which they considered important.
Yeah.
Also, there's other people who've contacted you because of your closeness to Dr. King. Aren't there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. I wouldn't have a list like that, a sort of who's who of people on other realms. These are unascended people. Let me just say that. I don't claim contact with ascended masters or cosmic masters. In other words, interplanetary intelligences. Even if I had such contacts, and there's nothing to say that a person couldn't have such contacts, I still wouldn't claim it, because it could cause confusion within the Etherocyte. In the Etherocyte, which, as you know, I'm secretary and have been for a long time, we do not recognize claims, officially recognize claims of contacts with interplanetary or ascended masters, in order to avoid the kind of confusion that really did a lot of damage in the Theosophical Society. So even if someone had a genuine contact, once you go down that road, then somebody could have a false one, and you could end up really in trouble. So all of those people and all the people I ever talk about are unascended people. But coming to your point about the medium, the caliber of the medium, they would be a person who is qualified in themselves to do it. I mean, they would have had to have training, depending on their level of guide, though. Let me just say that. I mean, there are psychics, there are mediums who reach a certain level. It might probably be the majority of the accurate ones. And when I say accurate, I don't mean 100% accurate, but I do mean accurate. You'd have to be an advanced yogi, a real serious practitioner of yoga, to be 100% accurate. If not yoga, an advanced mystical system, tumo, something like this. And usually people in those fields aren't mediums. That's not the direction that they go in, usually. Dr. King is an absolute anomaly, and we'll come to him, because he used a yogic state at the highest that you can get for mediumship. I don't know of anyone else who's ever done that. And I will say, as I've certainly learnt about mediumship and progressed along the way, my appreciation for Dr. King's mediumship has expanded exponentially. Bit like, if you sort of play football quite well, and then you look at
Premier League.
You appreciate them far more.
Totally.
So you're looking in someone who's claiming a mediumship. You think, well, why would they contact you? What is your training? What is your development? Not just as a mediumistic development, but your spiritual development, if it's a high caliber of guide. If it's not, that's a different matter. And as I say, most mediums who are good, accurate, good, they settle, I think. They settle at a certain level. They don't progress. They may not even want to progress. They can be very successful at what they're doing, and they stay there. So they could have multiple guides, longer than that list, but they'll be generally, as I mentioned earlier, the loved ones, associates, maybe a past life connection, with someone who's here that they have a personal interest in.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that helps us to simplify the conversation a little bit, because if we focus basically on, let's talk about people who are claiming to receive teachings.
Yeah,
basically.
okay. Yeah.
And how do you evaluate people who are claiming to receive teaching? Now, the first thing you've talked about there is looking at the medium and what qualifies them.
Yeah.
And so we've talked about some of the reasons why a medium might be contacted, and you've been a great example of the work that you do, the position you hold in the Aetherius Society, and also the relationship you had with Dr. King, and why people might be contacting you because of that.
Absolutely, and we can give examples of that. Yeah.
And then the other side of it is what is it about the medium, or what practice has put them in a position to attain sufficient rapport with the contact or the communicators in which they claim to be in contact with?
You've got the exact word, rapport.
Okay, yeah.
Because in the state, it is a state of rapport. Now, we need to break this down, because there's two kinds of mediumship, essentially. One is where the medium enters trance of one kind or another, and the communicator speaks through their voice. And if it's really good, like if you take Dr. King, who's the benchmark, the gold standard of this, it's far, far better if they can do it, and very, very few people, I believe, can.
Yeah.
And most people shouldn't even try. I did try, wrongly try, in the early 80s, and I found I lost some willpower as a result of it, and I made a couple of mistakes.
Okay.
Because I wasn't entering an elevated yogic state. I'd never entered it. I've only entered a Samadhi condition in the last 3 years. So most people shouldn't try it. Now, where you're doing that, you get, if it's like in the case of Dr. King, we've done the audiobook of his biography, and on there you hear many of the transmissions, and on Audio Cloud you can obtain them through our website, the Aetherius Society website. You don't just get the words, you get the feeling, the intonation, the energy, the power through the voice of the communicator, which is completely consistent over decades with Dr. King. The same communicator in the 50s and in the 70s is exactly the same. And knowing him as I did, and he was a great humorist, he had a tremendous sense of humor, and over dinner would sometimes impersonate various people for the sake of a joke or something. Yeah. He wasn't like the best impersonator in the world. He was fine, and nor am I, by the way. So I'm not, this isn't critical, but it's a fact. But when he was, so this is just an acid, but in his mediumship, you hear the voice, say, of the Master Aetherius in 1978, and you hear that voice from 1956.
Yeah, same voice.
It's exactly the same voice. That's about accuracy. But to get the much more power through a transmission of that kind. Now, the other kind, which is the method I use, and it's the method Alice Bailey, for example, used, and I believe Blavatsky, and other people through history, one of whom was John of Patmos, I believe, but we're coming to him in another show.
Yeah.
The other method is what you might call a mental telepathic reception. I mean, in the case of Dr. King, he'd call this a mental transmission in his case.
Okay.
But at a lower level than his level, you can telepathically receive thoughts and you write them down. It's not automatic writing, because automatic means you've been taken over. You haven't been taken over.
Yeah.
You are not in a deep trance. You're not technically in a trance, in the sense you can move your hand, you could walk around if you possibly, and you could get the message if you elevated your consciousness. But to come to your word rapport, in that state too, for the time that you're receiving that communication, you have to have elevated your consciousness to a level that's compatible with the communicator. That's a simple secret, which actually Dr. King revealed, I've found to be true, but a lot of mediums don't know. So your average person, just to come to the person who takes a weekend workshop and is told, by the end of this you can channel the Virgin Mary, the Master Kuthumi, and the people from the Pleiades. I'm sorry, it's sad actually. It's very sad. I don't want to belittle people, but they won't be able to do that, because they won't be able to elevate their consciousness to the level of that caliber of intelligence. I'm not saying anyway people from the Pleiades would even choose to communicate. I think it would be surplus to requirements in our world. I don't want to be dogmatic here, but I'm just illustrating a point.
There are a lot of things I'd like to pick out. I mean, one is that, okay, so you would need to be able to raise your consciousness. So what do we really mean when we say attain rapport with an ascended master or even with an extraterrestrial? I mean, what level of consciousness are we talking about? I mean, how might someone experience that, and also how might someone observe that? What's going on?
You know, in prayer, because you're a wonderful prayer.
Thank you.
and we have training, and we have some wonderful prayers in the Etheric Society. Prayer is a science and a skill too. People don't put anything into it in some churches. They don't think it matters at all. They don't have any training. They don't make any effort. They don't even use the right mudras. But that's another story. But you're familiar with the idea of two things you're striving for. One is the quality of the prayer, and the other is the quantity of the energy, the output. So there are two separate things. Now, in channeling, I'd say again, there are two things. There's the level of consciousness you're on, and the degree of concentration you have.
Okay, yeah.
And strangely, I found when I was instructed at one point, less than 10 years ago, that I could only now channel people from level 5. There are 7 levels around the Earth. We're level 1, and then it goes all the way through to 7, upwards. We won't talk about downwards. Don't want to channel.
Don't be doing that, please. Yeah.
No, it does happen, sadly. A lot of imposters are doing that.
We'll come back to the negative trance.
We'll come back to that, yeah. But I was told to stay at level 5 and upwards, and 7 is uninhabited, so we're talking 5 and 6. But I found when I started, it was very difficult, and I'll tell you why. Because when I started to elevate my consciousness sufficiently to be able to do that at all, I also started to enter a blissful state as I did so. And part of me didn't want to concentrate on any message. I just wanted to enjoy and
Exactly.
So strangely, the concentration element became slightly more difficult in one way. But dealing with the rapport is elevating your consciousness at that point. Now, you're not going to be walking down the street probably, or going to the newsagent, or whatever, cooking dinner in that state. But when you are channeling, when you're doing mediumship, you've got to be able to enter that state, or some of the people on that list simply couldn't communicate with you. I mean, I mentioned a couple of guides I had when I started doing the readings. I could have had an easy rapport with them, and they may have been around me for a while. I don't know, because I wasn't aware of them when I was younger.
Okay.
But they were helping me. Now, what I found was that it turned out like 5 or 6 years later that they were actually disciples of a very elevated Tibetan. I mean, this is going to upset a lot of people, but I believe it to be Guru Padmasambhava. And I don't believe he's ascended yet, but I think he's a wonderful, elevated person. But the point being, I couldn't get him, so I got his guides, or his disciples, who helped me. Eventually, and it was after I was made a bishop by Dr. King, he was able to gain some rapport with me, but it had to be done very carefully, especially at first. So one of these disciples would come to me and say at sort of 11 a.m., actually it was very often after I'd been taking a service as a bishop. The time was often chosen, I noticed. But what I did find, whatever the time was, though, I wouldn't be interrupted during that time, even if there was phones in the building or whatever. But it was by appointment, by arrangement, and only because I'd reached a different level as a result of not me, but an initiation given to me by Dr. King in this case, that he could then start to use me. I'm only mentioning that to illustrate a point here. The medium can evolve, and as the medium evolves, the caliber of the guide can also evolve, and so you can then attain a higher state of consciousness, which means a higher caliber of guide, or a more evolved, that's a better word, caliber of guide can actually use you.
I love this, because I think it really starts to elaborate on the subtlety of what's really going on. That that'd be hard to see if you were new to this or you weren't familiar with some of the things that you're saying, because first of all, the first point you were making there, I think, is that unless you were able to raise your consciousness to a certain level, a certain level of communicator would simply not be able to communicate with you. I think this is
they wouldn't be able to, absolutely.
There's a number one red flag test that anyone can apply. I mean, you can look at someone and then you can look at the claim that they're making, an ascended master, an extraterrestrial, who would be orders of magnitude more enlightened than anyone on Earth.
Yeah.
Levels of consciousness millions of years more evolved than our own.
Yeah.
It's just, there's an incompatibility there.
Let me be really careful here and say this. On rare occasions, epiphanies, you might say, someone who couldn't actually channel an elevated intelligence might have a vision of them. I mean, let's say they might have a vision of St. Peter, or they might have a vision of a great being. Yeah. And they could get an impression of a thought. They could even get an impression of a thought during a UFO sighting. So I'm not going to close the door completely on any kind of message, but if we're talking mediumship, channeling, becoming a channel for that individual to bring a specific message, no, you couldn't do that. Yeah.
So that's a very useful thing, I think, to share there. And I think also what you've said about the way that your own contacts evolved and the sort of deliberate nature in which they had to be arranged and the state that you had to be in order to attain a level of rapport with that kind of contact.
Yeah.
No one's talking about this.
But because they don't know, and they haven't done it. Yeah. There's a couple of other things I developed, because I mentioned the consciousness point. Yeah. In my case, now we're talking again, non-trance mediumship. When Dr. King, and I've been with him in the room, when he's been receiving a mental transmission, under certain cases, he has complete psychic vision as well while doing it, so he could sometimes even see the communicator through, over a distance, possibly, not just in the room. Yeah. There's a communication, actually, that he received in the 1960s from a very advanced, unascended, but almost ascended, but not, intelligence, inhabitant of level 6 by the name of the Master Chang Fu. Wonderful, wonderful master who's associated with Tibet. To me, his name sounds Chinese, but then we're going back in history a long way. But he was certainly associated with Tibet, or what you might say the Himalayas, and maybe things like Tumo. I don't know, but those kinds of practices which you'd find in Tibet. Now, in this particular communication in the 1960s, the Master Chang Fu had visited another realm, actually a lower one, and he'd seen a lineup of, I'm not going to go into the details of what it was about because it's a long story, but a lineup of people there, and he could see them. Now, he used the phrase, in my imagination, in the communication he gave, he said, words to this effect, in my imagination, I saw, I could see X, 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 X. Now, it's a very interesting use of that word, because most of us, when we think of imagination, we think of inventing unreality, something that doesn't exist.
Totally.
And as a matter of fact, before this show, I knew we were doing this show, I tried to do something which I've done before, which was to see, and this would be overnight last night, something on another realm. Now, when but the faculty, the point I'm coming to is the faculty that you're using, or the essence of the faculty you're using, is the same one that could also, under a different use, come up with unreality.
I see.
And this is a big problem for the sorts of mediums we're talking about, because they are imagining things which they believe to be true. Imagination can take you to truth. Goya, the artist, knew this, and he talked about it. And it can also take you into absolute fantasy. And I can't remember his exact quote, but it's a very devastating quote. He was, among other things, a portrait artist. If he was doing a portrait, say, and I'm no art historian at all, my wife is, I'm not, but if he was doing a painting, say, of the Duke of Wellington, which he did, a portrait, he could, do like a photographic reproduction beautifully, you might call it that. But with the power of what he called imagination, he could also bring to bear something of the essence of who and what
I see.
lay beneath this exterior when painting the Duke of Wellington. Imagination, controlled and directed by super consciousness, leads you to truth. Directed by the conscious mind or the subconscious mind can take you into a fantasy world. So, in this thing I was doing overnight, I could actually start to see green fields and things that were there. I wasn't trying to invent anything. I didn't allow myself to invent anything. And then as an exercise afterward, I tried to sort of, in my imagination, invent a picture of to compare the mental state. One is fleeting, one is light, that type of other imagination. Of course, the danger is, though, other forces, malevolent forces, or just confused forces can come to bear upon the consciousness of a would-be medium, and you can get real inaccuracy, and not just inaccuracy, but deliberate mistruths, which are out there. They're quite prevalent by those who want to confuse and want to do damage.
Well, I think coming to that point, because it's obviously a big part of this conversation that we're having today, wrong teachings causing confusion, etc., is let's come on to because you talked a little bit about concentration, and this point about imagination is really interesting. Well, what about technique? You mentioned you just touched on trance, but there's two kind of forms of trance, isn't there?
Yeah. So I mentioned that Dr. King, when taking a mental transmission, in other words, not speaking through his voice, but receiving it telepathically, he could still, if necessary, walk around. He could operate a handheld cassette recorder. He could write down. In that state, he had also at times brilliant psychic vision. Now, what I found for myself in developing these, two things helped me with developing accuracy. One was clairaudience, psychic hearing.
Okay.
So psychic hearing, which you have to do very carefully too, because there are lots of people who think they hear voices who don't.
Okay.
It's their imagination. It might even be a schizophrenic condition in the worst case scenario. And there are some people who are diagnosed as mentally ill, actually, who are hearing voices. That's happened through history as well. But anyway, I developed clairaudience. So there's a couple of advantages of clairaudience, as from the medium's point of view. When you hear the intonation of the speaker, so let's just say you were getting a communication from a Liverpudlian, and I have had that, a very famous one, won't go into now, but you can hear that accent very clearly, not just words coming into your brain. Now, the one thing this does is it helps me anyway to distinguish between an outside telepathic impression that's being delivered to you in thought and your own thoughts. And this is where so many people go wrong. It's a mix-up. It's a bit of something outside, even a good medium, a relatively good medium, then bits of their own thoughts, bits of their subconscious thoughts, all mingle together, and you get a partially accurate message.
Yeah, got you.
With clairaudience, you can, if you develop it enough, distinguish very clearly between what's coming to you, which is separate from your thoughts. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
Now, what you have to do, since you're not entering trance, is you have to make absolutely sure, and this is second nature to Dr. King, who was a trained yogi. In my case, I found it very difficult. People who say I think it's easy aren't accurate. I know that sounds dogmatic, but they just are not accurate. It isn't. Because you have to, one way or another, block out, ideally subsume and transcend, and in the case of Samadhi, transmute your conscious mind and your subconscious mind from being active. They've got to be inactive. You've got to just concentrate on what you're getting. So what I learned to do, first of all, even if you have to suppress it while you're receiving a message rather than control it, you've got to stop all other thoughts, all conscious thought. And so you just purely think. Your focus is entirely on, in my case, the words you're getting. There is a higher thing, which I've become aware of very recently, which is a thought beam.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a specialist thing. And that's the thing Dr. King had it down. I mean, he really controls
he describes that technique,
absolutely,
doesn't he?
yeah. But in most cases, it won't be that. It'll be thoughts that are coming to you, and just as a matter of interest, it'll be the solar plexus center generally that's active. You may not know it. I didn't used to know it. I know it now. And as those thoughts, and I want to move above that, by the way, but that's what the method I've used in the messages you mentioned here. As the thoughts come to you, you don't think about them. Because if you think about them, your conscious mind has been activated. You don't relate at all to the meaning of those words, even what the words mean. And one little thing I found very helpful is to not even get a word, but to get spellings. So,
like letters.
Yeah, like Letter, very, very quickly. This helps you not to think even with its letter.
Oh, yeah.
What's a letter?
Yeah.
There's
no meaning associated.
But occasionally,
yeah.
In the best will in the world, if you're not in trance, your conscious mind might pick up. I mean, I can give you an example of that if you like.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I was doing a film, or being filmed, for a production by a good friend of ours, actually, Mark Christopher Lee, who's made a film on Sir Francis Bacon. And he wanted to interview me because I am a medium for Sir Francis Bacon. I don't know if there are any others, but there may well be claimants. I don't know, but I am. Now, I wanted to get a message, by the way, for this film when we were recording in Soho in London in a hotel there, to bring along to this recording last year.
Yeah.
But Sir Francis himself wasn't willing, or I don't know about willing isn't quite the word, ready to give me any message.
Okay.
I realized actually that he was waiting for permission. They operate under a very strict code.
Another subtlety people don't get.
Yeah, well, certainly in my case, I can't talk about any other medium. And so I didn't get a message until the morning of the film. And it was a very, very short one. And I've got it written down here.
Oh, yeah.
And it was this simple. And it also answers the question of why people like that are interested in communicating with me at all. This was a one-sentence message. Dr. King surmounts my efforts as a mountain does a molehill. And that was the message. I didn't necessarily think it was a message that the filmmaker might want.
Okay, yeah.
But I can only go with what I get.
Yeah.
I will say this, though, and this is to illustrate the point I was making earlier. As he said surmounts, because I'm a writer, my conscious mind just instinctively pricked up and said, is that the word? Don't you mean surpasses? Don't you mean, And I brushed that aside because you go with what you get. It's just a little thing and you surmounts. Okay, definitely surmounts. My efforts as a mountain does a molehill. I was helped a lot by actually channeling a number of poems, and some of them are in God's Guides and Guardian Angels, the book I co-authored with Mark Bennett. Little plug there for God's Guides and Guardian Angels.
Good book.
And that's some years ago. But I was helped because when you're channeling a poem, you've got to have rhymes in some cases. You've got to have meter. So the exact word does matter.
Yeah, totally.
You can't be a generality of a word. Yeah. Anyway, I got that message. Dr. King surmounts my efforts as a mountain does a molehill. Now, I have found in messages I've had from Sir Francis Bacon before that sometimes you find a parallel of lines in Shakespeare.
Okay.
Because I'm a believer that, I'm not just a believer, and Dr. King was clear on this, and I'm sure of this. He was one of the main authors of Shakespeare. He's also one of the main authors, I understand, of the New English Bible, the King James Bible, done at roughly the same. So actually, those are the two best-selling, I think, English works ever in history.
Wow. Yeah.
Over the time, hundreds of years, and he was involved in them both. And that wasn't even his main field. But anyway, so I have found that. So I did look up Shakespeare. I put that up on the internet just before I went to the interview, and I found this from Henry VI, Part 3, which I've never read, let me say, or acted in certainly in this life.
Okay.
Come make him stand upon this molehill that wrought at mountains with outstretched arms, yet parted but the shadow with his hands. My writing isn't very good. So he had a quote about mountains and a molehill from that play.
And you can see the meaning, actually, how it would relate to what he said. Yeah.
I think I don't know what exactly related to, but it's something, and I found that quite often with him. Mm-hmm. But when I went to do the interview, what I didn't realize, that one of the things that this film that Mark Christopher Lee was making, which I think might be out now, certainly there's I think a first edition on my website of this film. It's mainly about the quest for the Holy Grail, and he was particularly focused on a thing called Bacon's Mount.
Okay.
This is what he was looking for, and it's somewhere in St Albans. Does exist. It's one of the keys to the search for the Holy Grail. Some people believe in Rosicrucianism. I knew none of this. I'd never heard of Bacon's Mount. So I then come back to this word, surmounts my efforts, which I'd hesitated over. So you've got clever, in that sentence, you've got Dr. King surmounts my efforts as a mountain does a molehill. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it tells us one of the motivations of someone like Bacon in communicating with me, his reverence for Dr. George King. Yeah. Exactly the same with Dante, same with a number of those. And also, in some cases, their interest in the Aetherius Society too.
Yeah, no, there's some great tips in there in terms of concentration and how you develop that over time. And then also the way that, using clairaudience, that it can help you to discern, whether something's coming from outside of you or they're within. So I think those are very useful in terms of the sort of the telepathic contacts.
Yeah.
And for anyone who might be doing that, can help give a little bit of guidance about the sort of rigor and the discipline and the practice and that needs to be applied.
Can I make a controversial statement?
I would invite it.
I have great respect for, well, we have tremendous respect for Blavatsky, who's given messages. As a matter of fact, I had an impression of Blavatsky even before I started channeling, even before I became a psychic consultant, when I first became secretary of the Aetherius Society. And actually, Dr. King published this in his journal, Cosmic Voice. Mm-hmm. I saw her. And I received, a few days later, and Nikki Wood, who was then my sort of PA, you might say, still is to this day, actually, amazing lady, she'll bear witness, but that because I told her about it, that in the post, an exact photograph of Madame Blavatsky arrived, dressed to me at the Aetherius Society, and it was the exact image, because I didn't know what she looked like then, that I'd seen in my room. And I'd got a little impression of a message, a helpful message, when I first became secretary. And then later on, I channeled her. But Alice Bailey, I haven't channeled. But I do believe she might be an example, I'm just going to say might be, of someone who was an extremely remarkable person, who claimed contacts, I think I'm right in saying, with Master Kuthumi, Master KH, ascended master, in her childhood. Well, not actually contacts, visions of, I think, presence of. Mm-hmm. And years later, she channeled the Master DK, as I think he's referred to, Dwal Kul, Tibetan adept, I believe. Now, I actually, and Dwal Kul is a disciple of the Master Kuthumi. Now, it's quite possible, because she had a very demanding life and a marital life, and I think she had children, and she had to earn money, and so she was extremely occupied. I think it's possible that she wasn't able, this is the controversial bit, to actually channel the Master KH.
Oh, as she may have been intended to do.
Maybe. And therefore, it's a bit of a reverse thing, but at a very elevated level, to what I was saying about these disciples of the Guru.
Oh, yeah, going up.
But I'm not comparing it at this point, but it's a similar principle. So that she therefore got the Master DK, very, very interesting and profound communications, or I think she even called it a rapport or collaboration. Maybe it was
collaboration,
And so that happened. It might be an example of someone who couldn't attain, and if so, kudos to her for not making any false claims, the level of an ascended master, because she simply hadn't been able, for whatever reason, been able to train herself to that degree that it would be required to channel one of the most prominent members, I will say, of the spiritual hierarchy of Earth.
Yeah, it's a great story. I think very instructive as well, because
Controversial. It won't be liked by maybe some theosophists.
But I mean, to her credit, I think it shows a certain
Absolutely.
degree of like realism and modesty
Yeah.
in what she was claiming to do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And therefore, it's an appreciation of what it would have meant to have been in contact
Yeah.
with the Master KH.
Indeed.
So I wanted to come back to the trance points that you were making
Yeah.
earlier, because I think this is a big one.
It's a massive one.
And another very good test, because there's a lot of mediums who do even describe going into a negative trance state, but then they claim to be in contact with very elevated beings, either from this world or beyond. And I think what we're saying is that there is an incompatibility there. That's not how they could or would communicate with somebody on Earth.
Yeah. Can I just say how humble Dr. King was? I'm coming to your point.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But because he talks about his trance method, and he calls it positive trance sometimes. It's a Samadhi trance, actually, as though it's something that some other people do.
Yeah.
It's something you do.
Yeah.
You know, this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
him.
yeah,
I mean, as
yeah.
you know, he said to me one day, "There's nothing I've done that you couldn't do," and I really believe that. And this is him.
Yeah.
What he did was he entered Samadhi through very intensive yoga practice, through complete celibacy. And celibacy, if you're going to do that level, is a requirement, I would say. And there's an acid test for you right
Already.
there.
Yeah.
Because you have to transmute. You don't lose. Now, I don't want to do a detour here, but you don't lose the essence of the sexual energy, but you raise it.
Yeah.
And there are
This
various
is a good teaching right here.
words for it. Ojas is a yogic word, and Dr. King's given a brilliant lecture on that. In Tumo, it would be Tiglis. And I'm going to throw this in, although it's not our topic. It's described in both cases as a fluidic. It's an etheric liquid energy. And I believe, now I'm saying what I believe, it's liquid, it's fluid. I think Tigli they call drops, because the sex center is governed by the element of water.
Oh, interesting.
You won't hear that anywhere else. That's a Spiritual Freedom Show original revelation right
Exclusive.
there.
Yeah, okay.
But the point I'm making, though, is actually strange enough, because people who do take seriously the spiritual path think, well, I don't want to lose that. And by the way, I'm no saint. I have made mistakes. I haven't been celibate all my life. I'm not putting myself up at all. I'm putting Dr. King up. But what I do know is that the ecstatic quality of that energy that we're talking about is generated by Kundalini. It can be risen and not lost, but actually amplified in higher chakras in a peaceful state. And people can't understand the concept of ecstatic peace or peaceful ecstasy, because we're used to pleasure of all kinds being a physical stimulation, an activity. But you won't lose anything if you take it higher. If you take it higher, which isn't easy.
Yeah, that's a beautiful description.
It takes, certainly in my case, I'm a very slow learner, and it can take a long time, but it can be done. That much I know. Now, in the case of Dr. King, though, here's a person who was he was celibate, and I've spoken to his sister, not only his wife, I know very well, but also his sister, who said he was impeccable, if that's the right word, in terms of her friend. She was younger than him, that he might even, maybe have dinner with. But he was strict, and he stuck to it. And on top of that, practiced the yogas, the advanced yogas, for 10 hours a day. And that's why he attained Samadhi. It doesn't fall upon you, some weekend seminar, and it'll depend on the whole of your life. And he's the one to look at. Look at his life. He did it perfectly all the way through. I speak as his biographer. It was a fantastic pattern. So he ended up in his 30s able to attain Samadhi. But what did he do with it? And this is where he's so unusual. He used it in a way I've never come across anywhere. Not saying it's never existed, may have happened out of the public eye, not saying it hasn't, but he turned it in public to be used in service through mediumship, not for his bliss, not even for his knowing, not even for his oneness, but in service to give teachings. So there's the gold standard.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I know what we need to talk about is people who are below that. And I honestly think that any other trance below Samadhi, if used in mediumship, is dangerous, potentially dangerous. It might be okay, and it might not. It might be okay one day, but then you slip into it, you get used to slipping into it. Worst case scenario, you could get possessed by the wrong entity, or you could be told by an entity, an impersonating entity, who's impersonating either because they are egotistical, which is less dangerous in a way, actually, than the person who's impersonating in order to deliberately cause confusion in the spiritual movement and stop people taking to truth.
I think this is kind of the big problem that we're talking about.
It is. Yeah. And those conditions, I mean, Dr. King called it negative trance, and it is a state where you have to blank out your mind, because you see, you've still got to allow an entity to take over you, but you haven't controlled, in the way I mentioned
earlier,
the conscious and subconscious minds either. So what can come out is either uncontrolled imagination. You're not in any trance at all. You've told yourself you are, but you aren't. And your wandering mind and your wandering imagination is producing writings that you actually think. I'm not dealing with con men and con women now.
Sure.
That's a whole different thing. But you actually think are writings from guys, and they aren't. And you're on a road to mental ill health. It's quite dangerous for you as an individual, never mind the people who believe in you, who are going to have a massive disappointment. And we've seen that over and over again. People go down a line and then they find this person wasn't what they said. I've been in a studio with a man by the name, I will say, and he's still got a following now, I think a bit, he's passed on now, Benjamin Cream, who said that the next master would arrive, I think it was later that year, and I think he believed it, in Brick Lane. He specified where, in London. And I was on the same show on Radio London, I think. I said, he won't, actually. I'd spoken to Dr. King about this, because he knew Benjamin Cream at one time. And I said, he won't arrive in Brick Lane. And he said he will. He didn't. Strangely enough, Benjamin Cream goes on. He comes up with something.
Some explanation.
I remember one medium, not Benjamin Cream actually, got something really wrong, and believed it. So they wouldn't put it out if they didn't think it was going to happen, because they'd be a fool to do that. It didn't happen. And then they said, well, actually, what that was a guide or the god or whoever they were claiming deliberately testing us. So that we'd have disappointment, so to see whether we'd remain true to the... and he still managed to keep followings, So I'm afraid it's a very dangerous field, but roughly speaking, without that positive trance condition, which would have to be a condition in which you had transmuted for that time at least, or completely damped down the function of the conscious and subconscious minds. So you might not even have any memory of it. Dr. King didn't have memory of his transmissions. They had to be played back to him. He didn't have it in his subconscious because he damped that down in this state of trance while he was getting it. And if you can't do that, then you really are going to have, I say, either your own imagination gone wild, or worst case scenario, some imposter speaking through you. It's possible, though. It's possible you might also have some reasonable person. I've heard actually an example quite recently. of someone who claimed on a radio show I was doing or podcast to channel a 19th century English gentleman. It was a woman, and when she spoke, the voice changed a lot. It was a male voice, actually, it sounded like, and what he was saying was perfectly credible, and it could be completely true. She might have sufficient protection to be able to do that one thing because she'd known him in a former life. This is what she said. He was no one of any particular note at all. He wasn't claiming to give the answer to life's problems. He just talked about what life was like in Victorian London. And that could be perfectly genuine. But it's where you get people making the big pronouncements, you know, the announcements about the great change, the great awakening, the whatever it might be, the landing from Sirius, and etc. This is where people are unfortunately having games played upon them, or they're a con man or a con woman, and that's they'll suffer bitter karma if they are.
I think so. Just hearing what you're saying, there's kind of a triangulation here between the technique used, the level of consciousness of the medium that they can attain, and also the level of consciousness of the communicator that they claim to be in contact with. And those things sort of all have to be...
They all have to be right.
Yeah, they'll have to be coherent and make sense together. Otherwise, you know, like you couldn't be using a negative trance condition to contact someone who is highly elevated.
No. They couldn't use you because you haven't gained that rapport of you in your consciousness. So in fact, and another thing I'd like to throw in too, if you're able to raise your consciousness to a high level, you are manipulating karma.
Yeah, there's another point, isn't it?
We're manipulating karma all the time. Now, I actually believe one of the reasons that Dr. King went through that 10-year period, I don't think he knew it at the time, but at least he was obviously guided by his higher self to do it. Didn't fully know it, I don't think, was to manipulate karma because he'd made this massive effort. He then could elevate his consciousness. He was given particular techniques to use in the state where, say, the master ethereist would speak through him. That karmic manipulation of all that effort and that ability and that advancement allowed an intelligence of the very high caliber of the master ethereist to use him, plus who he really was, of course, but still had to be manipulated in that life on the physical plane. You know, the physical plane is extremely important. So we're talking guides. Guides, it's much easier on a higher level to gain higher consciousness than it is here. Much easier. You could be on a higher level and really appreciate the Ethereal Society, for example, or Dr. King for another example. And when you come back here to do the same thing and live it is far more difficult. And the more advanced they are, the more they know that. Plus, if you take the model of interplanetary life, they have a complete link-up between what they would call their first aspect, but let's call it their highest consciousness, and their physical. Now, on another realm, they don't have a physical counterpart because they're waiting to be reborn. So they can't, although they may have a much higher level of consciousness, they can't replicate that interplanetary model. But somebody here on the physical plane can, in potential. It's much more difficult. But they could if, in their physical body, they gain that contact with their own higher consciousness. And that's why ascension has to take place on the physical plane. Going off topic again.
Yeah, but another revelation there. So if we come back to this for a moment. So
bring me back, please.
Well, we talked about that kind of the technique, the consciousness, the medium, the consciousness of the communicator, and all of that supported by the real spiritual development of the medium in the first place, as you've described, the kind of rigor and training and discipline that goes into developing concentration and even elevating your level of consciousness to certain levels, so that you can attain this keyword rapport that you've talked about there. There's one other thing that I wanted to talk about here, because we already talked a little bit about, why said medium in any particular case, and you gave some great examples. But when people actually look at the message itself that a particular medium claims to receive, how might someone evaluate that?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's a very key point I should have mentioned, really, because sometimes you don't even need to do any more than look at the message.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
you know this is not great wisdom. You know, and in some ways, and Dr. King used to say this, if you look at, for example, the messages he received, the teachings he received, even if you weren't fully in tune with mediumship and how he says he got them and where he says he got them from, if they're great wisdom, and they are, and they're great teaching, and they bring you greater enlightenment, and the more you become enlightened, the more you appreciate them, and the more meanings become clear to you, that's enough, really. If you have a teaching, and I gave a couple of examples where, you know, somebody predicts something that clearly isn't true, somebody gives a teaching that clearly isn't right, and even if it's right, it sort of isn't substantial.
Totally.
You know, it just fritters away, and there's nothing much there, and it doesn't bear scrutiny, doesn't bear meditation, it doesn't bring forth the fruit of meditation when you focus upon it, then that's a clear way of saying, well, look, this could not be a communication from who you claim it to come from, because such an intelligence wouldn't give something that superficial, frankly.
That's a good word for it.
Superficial, or even just wrong.
Yeah. So there's one easy test there. You know, is it something that's direct and substantive?
It's a very important test.
And real wisdom, or is it something sort of woolly and nonsensical, which kind of just, you know, goes?
I mean, I'll give you an example. When I was, you know, I was in my late teens, and I was searching, I was looking at various claims, and I went to one medium who claimed to channel, I think, a Jupiterian.
Oh, really?
A woman she had a little following there, and she said the messages she got, I remember saying this, were mainly agricultural. It's almost, sorry, it sounds ridiculous, but they were mainly agricultural, and in such a way that we couldn't possibly understand really what they mean. So I said to her, I was sort of 19 or so, I said, well, why would they give a message that we couldn't possibly understand what they mean? And she had no answer for that. Now, you didn't need to go any further than that, really, because she had no idea, she didn't know what they meant or why they gave them.
Yeah, neither did anyone listening.
And that's a silly example, but I mean, you do get stuff like that, and it's easy to discriminate.
I think the other way that people can discriminate when they're looking at the message is, you know, there's a lot of so-called communicators who people think are from a higher realm who are not, who their message will be one that really panders to the ego of the listeners, and rather than delivering sort of hard spiritual truths and proven wisdom, which is in line with the ancient wisdom that we have on earth already. And so there's kind of a logical test that you can apply
there
as
is.
well, isn't there?
And I think the biggest one is, what do you do as a result of this teaching? What does it enable you to do? And if it doesn't enable you to do anything, if it's just, even if it's quite clever intellectual pursuit, that's not a good enough reason for a great intelligence to give a teaching. I mentioned the Master Chang Fu earlier, and when he did give some teachings, he gave them in a very almost simplistic, it isn't simplistic, but it's almost simplistic manner to some of the people he was giving them to at the time through Dr. King. This is before Dr. King actually became, you know, the medium for cosmic intelligences. And so, for example, he would say to someone who said, why can't I remember my past lives? And he'd say to them, well, you know, and I can't do his voice, or I wouldn't try to, but words to this effect, it can be very unpleasant and very uncomfortable, because we've all done rather bad things, and it's not very nice, really, to remember those things and put over in that way to someone. But in there lies a massive teaching, though, because it's telling us that we put out of our minds disturbing things. Even in this life, to remember something really troubling and disturbing is difficult for a lot of people. And certainly, if it implies any wrong action on our part, people don't want to do that. They want an excuse. They don't want to think about it. They put it out of their minds. Some criminals and some psychotics put out of their mind any sense of harm that they've ever done anybody, just to get on, as they think, with their life. But once you start remembering it, great truth is revealed. And if that applies within this life, it applies all the more so. Never mind the programming we have. that there's no such thing as past life memory, and the doubts that will crop up and all the rest of it. These are all blockages. But in that, as I say, that very simple little message there's profound meanings, which I've come to realize over the years to be an absolute key to memory of all kinds, actually.
Yeah, no, so that's a good example of, does the message withstand the scrutiny of much deeper contemplation and meditation?
It's a very important point.
You also mentioned earlier, the intonation, the energy, the consistency between the voice that you may have heard.
With Dr. King.
With Dr. King, yeah. And that, that own experience that you can have of listening to a medium being an important point, important criteria that you can use to judge, whatever you're listening to in front of you.
Yeah.
And I think so, as far as the message goes, obviously there's these different tests, logically that you can apply to what you're even hearing, and then apply to your contemplation, meditation procedures that stand up to that further scrutiny. But also your experience of it is important.
It is. Bringing up another point, it isn't just logical examination, it's feeling.
Yeah.
And you can feel it, you can feel the power of it. You can feel that sometimes in a written message, but not nearly as much.
Yes.
For example, I've had messages which have been very moving to various people. But obviously, if you're hearing the voice, you're getting the full energy of it. If you go to a concert and there's an orchestra playing, you get not just the sound, which you get on a disc.
Okay.
You get the energy too. It's even more than that, though, because even in the disc you also get the sound. But it's that kind of thing. You get the full interplay of forces when you can hear, even in a tape recording, the voice as well as reading the words.
Yeah. So when it comes to messaging, I think there's the three things. There's, how can you examine it logically? The feeling, maybe your intuition, what it's telling you about this, and then also the experience that you can have.
Yeah, and it's not whether you like it always either. And I know people, somebody said to me, well, I don't like the idea of reincarnation. This person was a mother and didn't want to think, because a lot of parents like to think they've created their children.
Okay.
And if they didn't exist, those children wouldn't exist either. And they've given life. Actually, they've been a custodian for life, yes.
Custodian, that's a good one.
Absolutely. Yeah. But that life, I'm afraid, sorry to tell them, would have gone somewhere else if it hadn't gone through them. And she didn't like it, this person, and therefore she didn't want to believe, or she didn't believe it, because and you do get that, you used to get that a lot in the mind, body, spirit. It used to be called pick and mix.
Oh, yeah.
You pick the bits of it that you like, but I'm afraid, no. Truth is, and the things you don't like can be the most beneficial ones to you.
Yeah, it's not MBS, mind, body, spirit, it's mind, body, soup, isn't it? That's what it's become. That's what I think about it. But yeah, no, I totally agree. It's this sense of inner knowing that comes from the essence of your being.
Let me give a shout out to Body, Mind, Spirit magazine, because they're bringing out an article by me on channeling quite soon.
Oh, really?
With all these points in some of them anyway.
That's good. That's good. So I think just to kind of wrap up here, I mean, we talked about the medium themselves. What makes this a credible contact in the first place? And you get some great examples there of, your relationship, the work that you do, and also, your closeness to Dr. King. And I think that, there's different ways you can look at someone and see the way they live their life, etc. You mentioned the celibacy and other moral and ethical conduct that would make them a channel that could be used in the first place.
Yeah, that celibacy point was related to Samadhi, by the way.
Sure,
I'm certainly not saying you couldn't be a good medium.
Sure.
You'd have to be. I haven't been celibate for a lot of my life, so I'm not claiming that at all. But to get to the Dr. King level, you would have to, really.
And I think...
And he did.
Yeah, it's good to apply that gold standard, because there are a lot of people who claim to have contact like Dr. King who don't. For the reasons that we're talking about here. So when you go beyond even just looking at the medium and you look at, okay, so what's the level of consciousness that they're actually able to achieve? What's the level of training that would substantiate that at all? What's, who's the communicator and what level of consciousness may they be at? And what is the technique that was actually used? And, you can apply these tests. We talked about the difference between the negative trance state and the positive trance state. And that if you're using a negative trance state, you're not going to be able to be used for some elevated communicator for them to give a highly spiritual message.
No, you're just not. You are just not. Exactly. And I wouldn't recommend anyone to use it at all. I would keep away from it, from negative trance, because I mentioned there's a medium I heard not that long ago who's probably using it and is doing fine, and you might be fine. but you might not. And I think Dr. King said safer to pitch a tent in the middle of the
Oh yeah, the LA freeway or
LA
something.
freeway, yeah.
Yeah.
Because there are big dangers. It can go really wrong, and there's the whole mental health aspect as well that can come in, and that's a big concern.
Well, I think there's some great points there for people to take away and to apply to this whole world of mediumship and channeling and messages that they see. So thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, Darren.
Thank you. Hey, Spiritual Freedom Show family, thanks for tuning into the show. Now, I think in that show, we got some fantastic guidance that we can immediately apply in order to determine whether a medium and their message is the real thing or not. And one of the biggest revelations for me was the insight about the consciousness of the medium, the consciousness of the communicator, and the technique used by the medium in order to attain rapport, especially when it comes to contacts with extraterrestrials, which is at least my main interest, because it's the most important source of confusion and where the stakes are highest in terms of guidance being given to people on Earth right now. I think it was revealing that it is extremely unlikely that anyone would be able to contact an extraterrestrial source using a negative trance condition, because you need to be able to raise your consciousness to attain a level of rapport with the communicator, who is by definition an extremely enlightened being, even if they are an ascended master from Earth, let alone an extraterrestrial being. And what this means is being able to raise Kundalini to a high chakra and attain some degree, at least, of Samadhi. And this requires many lives, and in this life, many years of strict discipline of one kind or another, yoga or tumo, etc., as Richard mentioned. A fair number of people would be disqualified on that basis alone. Those are just a few of the takeaways that I took from the show that I wanted to highlight for you, and which I hope will give you the clarity and the discernment to make your own judgments. Now, if you enjoyed that show about mediumship, then do follow, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future episodes that can help you to awaken your chakras, to unlock your psychic powers, and to discover true spirituality. Now, if you're interested in more right now, I can recommend this video over here that goes deeper into Richard's own journey to enlightenment and the experience of Samadhi. Thanks for tuning into the show. We'll see you next time.